Artistic Director of AmiciMusic. I want to welcome you to my living room with my father's beautiful paintings in the background here in Baltimore, Maryland, for the first of 3 concerts we're going to do called Beethoven's Violin, in which we will perform most of Beethoven's violin sonatas. He wrote 10. We're going to do 8, only because it's too hard to get all 10 of them into 3 concerts, and 4 seem like too many. So we're leaving off number 2 and 3, which were not the most important of his sonatas, we don't think, but we're going to give you a pretty good example of Beethoven's work with these 2 instruments. My partner in crime for these programs is the wonderful Tim Schwarz on violin. Tim and I were at Peabody together many years ago, and just after we left, we became the artistic ambassadors for the United States of America and went on a wonderful 2-month tour of the Middle East and Southeast Asia, playing in places like Syria. We played in Aleppo, Syria, sadly, which is no more, Egypt, Thailand, Sri Lanka, Tunisia, so many wonderful places back in 1996. Tim has remained a friend through all of these years, and I thank him for coming to Baltimore to record all of these. I want to thank also Emmanuel and Francis Borowski for their work in helping us edit and video these pieces, and we hope you will enjoy these 3 concerts. So sit back and relax, and please, if you can, below is our website, AmiciMusic.org, and if you enjoy what you hear, please help us, support us with a donation so we can continue to make these live streams through this pandemic. Enjoy the program. Our first program will feature 3 of his sonatas: Sonata number 1, Sonata number 4, and Sonata number 5, known as the Spring Sonata. And we're going to begin, we're at the beginning, at the first sonata, which is Opus 12, number 1. So Beethoven went to this genre, violin and piano, fairly early on and kept going through most of his life. This was a genre that Mozart had tackled considerably, written 42 violin sonatas. Although they were not what we think about as violin-centered sonatas. Mozart's were more piano sonatas with a little violin on the side. That was the norm, that the piano sort of was the leader, and the violin got a little bit of stuff to add some high notes to it. But Beethoven was the first to really try to equalize these instruments, and we'll see that through the whole oeuvre that we're going to do. In the first one, it is a little bit more piano-centric, but right at the beginning, it starts off unison with this very bold statement in the instruments, and this arpeggio up. I think Beethoven trying to say, we're going to try to be as equal as we can here, but it's filled with scales and arpeggios and just the flourish that exemplified Beethoven as a brash young man. Now, he had come over from Bonn, Germany to Vienna in 1792 and really had taken Vienna by storm. Everyone was talking about this young whippersnapper who sort of broke all the rules. He had started off studying with Haydn, but soon moved on to Salieri and others. And in fact, he dedicates this work to Salieri, who he was working at the time. We think of Beethoven as this kind of disheveled old guy shuffling through the streets, but this was not the case at this time. In fact, according to one author, he had learned to dance, had bought a horse, was sporting a powdered wig. He was a young giant exulting in his strength and in his success, and the youthful confidence gave him a buoyancy that was both attractive and infectious. So he really did have a power, and his music showed that he was here to stay. He was not the easiest person to get along with. There's a wonderful, he started taking piano students on at this time, and to one of them he said, "You will have to practice long and faithfully before you realize that you cannot play the piano." And many of his teachers grew frustrated with him, including Haydn. One of them, a guy named Alsbechtsberger, once famously said, "This Beethoven never has learned anything and never will learn anything. As a composer, he is completely hopeless." Famous last words by a forgotten composer. But Beethoven had studied violin in Bonn, and then when he got to Vienna, he actually took lessons with Ignaz Schuppanzig, who was a very well-known violinist, led a big quartet there for whom Beethoven wrote many of his string quartets. And this Opus 12 sonata was first performed at a benefit concert for a singer named Josefa Duszek on March 29th, 1798. And it has that sort of restless expressiveness that was early Beethoven. And the critics were both admired it, but were also baffled by it, as they often were with Beethoven. Here's one critic who wrote, "The three violin sonatas of Opus 12 are overladen with difficulties. Herr Beethoven goes at his own gait, but what a bizarre and singular gait it is. To be accurate, there is only a mass of learning here, without good method, obstinacy which fails to interest us, a striving after strange modulations, a heaping up of difficulties upon difficulties until one loses all patience or enjoyment." However, the critic, after he has tried more and more to accustom himself to Herr Beethoven's manner, has learned to admire him more than he did at first. This one is really sort of very much in the Mozartian Haydn style, but there are moments where Beethoven was already flashing his originality. It starts off with this, again, very exciting first movement. The second movement is a theme and variations, very beautiful theme. Only four variations. The third one is in minor and has that wonderful back and forth of dynamics from very quiet to very loud within a measure. That would become a Beethoven trademark. And then the rondo is just a fun, bustling movement that sort of reminds you of a sort of opera buffa of Mozart. So I hope you enjoy Sonata number 1 in D major, Opus 12, number 1. Jump ahead to his fourth sonata in A minor, Opus 23, that was written in the year 1800 or early 1801. And actually, this sonata was intended to be paired with the Spring Sonata, which comes next, in the same opus number. Beethoven saw them as two contrasting dualities, one in a minor key and one in the major, one very restless and one sort of more bucolic, very much the same way he did with the Fifth Symphony into the Sixth Symphony, the Fifth Symphony being this most dramatic fate symphony, the Sixth, this pastoral. He tended to think of these things as contrasts. And of course, he was living in this incredibly hyper-exaggerated time at the French Revolution, in which Wordsworth said, "Bliss was it in this dawn to be alive," and all the optimism that opened up. Then came the reign of terror and Napoleon and the violence of the times. Very much, I think, like our times today, where we have this back and forth whipping of optimism and pessimism and hope and despair, and hopefully we're back in hope. But for some reason, the engraver screwed up, and it didn't turn out to go in the same opus number. So now we have opus 23 for this one, and the opus 24 is the famous Spring Sonata. This was dedicated to the Count Moritz von Fries, who was a very good supporter and friend of Beethoven. He was the owner of a very prosperous banking firm and the treasurer to the imperial court. And he was younger than Beethoven, but very wealthy and very cultured. He traveled extensively. Goethe even mentioned him in one of his works. He lived in Paris. He got painted by Elisabeth Vigée-Lebrun, very famous painter. So he knew the world, and Beethoven admired him. And he had a home there, a palace, I guess you would say, in Josefplatz. And there was a wonderful theater, private theater there, in which many of Beethoven's works were premiered, including his Opus 11 piano trio for clarinet, cello, and piano. And it was at that concert a year earlier where Daniel Steibelt, a very famous pianist, had been at. And he then offered a sort of piano duel against Beethoven. He thought he could take on Beethoven, and so there was a very famous piano duel, as it was known, where they competed against each other, and Beethoven kind of crushed the young Steibelt, and Steibelt left with his head between his tail and never again wanted to be in the same room as Beethoven. But this piece, this A1 and A minor, which is not often played, but to me is one of his best ones. It's very austere, kind of a fugal or counterpoint, sort of evoking Bach, and very virtuosic. Beethoven was a remarkable pianist, and when he first came to Vienna, it was his piano skills that really amazed people, although he was known to destroy many of the pianos he played on because he played with so much force and power. There's a wonderful a story by Anton Rykov, another composer and friend of Beethoven, who was turning pages for Beethoven one day. He said, "Mostly during the concert, I was occupied in wrenching the strings of the piano which had snapped, while the hammers stuck among the broken strings. Beethoven insisted on finishing the concerto, so back and forth I leaped, jerking out a string, disentangling a hammer, turning a page. I think I worked harder than Beethoven." But this piece, really wonderful, has this exciting first movement, the wonderful back and forth dialogue between the instruments, a sort of very elegant second movement, and then a third movement again, which shows off a lot of this piano virtuosity and drives us to a very exciting finish that, again, surprises us because Beethoven, you always think, is going to end in this big power, but this one just sort of fades away into the sunset. So I hope you enjoy Sonata number 4 in A minor, Opus 23. For the fifth sonata, the famous Spring Sonata, thought you'd join me over here at the piano so I can sort of show one very fascinating thing that happened in this piece and its link to next generation of composers, especially Robert Schumann. But there is a sort of link to Felix Mendelssohn and Schubert as well in the way this piece is done. But it also sort of evokes Mozart in so many ways. The second movement could have been written, I think, by Mozart, and Beethoven always loved Mozart, and the two men supposedly had met once when Beethoven was a young man and had traveled to Vienna, and Mozart supposedly said to his wife, "Keep an eye on this young boy, he's got something to tell the world." But again, this sonata was written at the same time as the one you just heard, meant to be sort of paired with it, a much more bucolic piece than the more dramatic and austere fourth sonata. Beethoven didn't name it the Spring Sonata, but some other critics did, and it seems to fit very well. And in fact, we know that Beethoven loved these long walks out in nature. In fact, he once said, "You ask where my ideas come from." This is in a letter to a friend. "I cannot say for certain. They come uncalled, sometimes in association with other things. It seems to me that I could wrest them from nature herself with my own hands as I go walking into the woods. They come to me in the silence of the night or in the early morning, stirred into being by moods which the poet would translate into words, but which I put into sounds. And these go through my head, ringing and singing and storming until at last I have them before me as notes." But there are many stories of Beethoven being out in nature, listening to the sounds of nature, sometimes not being able to hear them, that really sort of were a major part of his life. And this piece has the sound of spring in it, much like the Pastoral Sonata has the sound of nature. Again, it really does feel that this piece is a little bit different than the others. It's the first one with 4 movements. And again, by adding another movement, you're making a piece more like a symphony than like a sonata. You're trying to make an extra genre. Now, the little extra movement he puts in, the scherzo, is only about a minute long. It's very short. But I wanted to demonstrate, this is how this movement begins. Little jokey scherzo in 3 beats. Now, I remember when I first played that, I said to myself, I know I've heard this music somewhere before. Where is it? Well, I had earlier, as a young boy, played from the album of Youth, Opus 68 by Robert Schumann, the very famous Soldier's March, which many early pianists did, and it sounds like this. Really sounds very similar. We know that Schumann did love Beethoven. He basically took Beethoven's 3-beat pattern, dum-ba-dum, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and just put it into a march. But we're going to see how many of these romantic composers saw Beethoven as their god. And this piece has a very Mendelssohnian feel in the first movement, this kind of song without words, elegant back and forth dialogue of the 2 instruments. Then this Mozartian kind of serene second movement, this scherzo-like third movement, which also evokes Mendelssohn, and then a fantastic last movement. So this is the very famous and bucolic pastoral Spring Sonata, Opus 24 in F major. Enjoy. you've enjoyed part one of our three-part extravaganza, Beethoven's Violin. Join us next week at the same time for part two. We will do sonatas number 6, 7, and 8 from his middle period, right around the time period where he almost killed himself as deafness set in. So they're a little bit more dramatic pieces, but filled with that Beethoven passion. And again, please do, if you can, offer a contribution to these concerts at the website below, AmiciMusic.org. We want to send these live streams out to as many people as we can, but we do need that to keep surviving during these difficult times. We'll see you again next week. Have a great one. Take care. I'm Dan Weiser, the Artistic Director of AmiciMusic.